Hello, listeners. Welcome to season 2 of the Masters Decoded podcast. I am Anis Merchant, the chief decoder. I want to thank you for the overwhelming response to season 1. Your feedback and encouragement led me to bring you season 2 of the Masters Decoded. The season will tap into how technology, artificial intelligence, and other socio-economic factors have impacted my guests' careers or passions. My next guest on today's episode is Mahmoud Kaabour. Mahmoud is an award winning Lebanese filmmaker and creative consultant based in Dubai and Berlin, working internationally. His multilingual productions have shown at top tier festivals and museums and were all broadcast worldwide. Mahmoud's films received numerous Best Film and Audience Awards, including Tribeca's $100,000 Audience Award for Grandma a Thousand Times, presented personally by Robert de Niro. Without much further ado, let me get on with it. Hey Mahmoud, welcome to Masters Decoded podcast, the second season. Glad to have you.
Hello, Anis. I'm delighted to be here.
Congratulations on the new release on the My Family and the Explosion, the mini series on the Beirut blast. I have seen some glimpses of it. It's beautiful and it's heart touching also, and it talks about a lot of things which mainstream media is not covering. Do you want to share how did that come about? Why did you do that?
Sure.
I want to share a glimpse of the recent documentary, My Family and the Explosion. The entire world was in a state of shock when we all saw the catastrophic impact the blast had on the city. But Mahmoud and his crew have spent time with the family to understand the real impact of the explosion. Here are some glimpses of the documentary, though in Arabic, it is the sadness in the voice of Nicole, which speaks the world language.
بقى ظهرت لبرا تشوف كيف حياخدوه كمان شفتهم محملينه وشفتهم حطوه على موبيلات واخذ نحن عائلة مؤلفة من 3 أشخاص عايشين كنا مرتاحين ومبسوطين.
My Family and the Explosion is a little film I put together in Beirut shortly after the massive blast that happened in the port of the city on August 4th of the last year. I, as a Lebanese, have not lived in Lebanon for many years. I actually got the news while I was with my daughters in a playground in Berlin, Germany, where I reside. But it felt as if the ripples of the explosion were coursing through me in that very moment.
Yes.
And for 2 days, I could not do anything except be on YouTube and try to decipher which of the streets that I know have been destroyed by this tragedy. And within less than 4 days, I was already packed and on a plane and headed to Lebanon in the middle of a serious corona pandemic, both in Germany and in Lebanon, and I just wanted to be there. I booked a crew. Many of them are wonderful film technicians whom I've worked with in the past, but many of them had not left their homes since the explosion has happened. So for 5 days, we were touring around Beirut and filming in places, and my crew were seeing the destruction for the first time. I really regret not having the camera on them. That could have been a parallel project, but we still covered the main sites. We spent a day in a hospital. We spent a day in Maram Khayel area, which was completely demolished. And we were releasing as much content as possible to news media. But along the side, there was a story that I got attached to. I spoke to a woman whose husband had sustained brain damage from the explosion itself. The doors of their home just flung off the hinges and fell on his head. And she was nonetheless such a reflective and poignant speaker. Her name is Nicole. And I went to my hotel that night, and in the morning I woke up and I only wanted to speak to her again. So I came back to her in the hospital and I was like, would you let me follow you a little bit longer? And she could not say a yes or no, but in a way, she wanted to grieve on camera. And I could feel how the camera was letting her speak some more about her fears for her family and for her daughter now that their husband is not showing signs yet whether he's going to recover or not. And that's how the story of this film started. I came back to Beirut a number of times and filmed with them again and again. And it's a way of telling the explosion story from the point of view of a small family rather than from the grand imagery of this massive explosion and, the Hollywood effect it had and because it was so uncanny how that explosion ripped through the city. But I'm trying to illustrate here how it touched upon lives.
No, I've seen some of the glimpses of the of that series which you did, of the movie which you did, and it's devastating for many of us because when the blast happened last year, many of us were shaken, even though it didn't impact us directly, but it did impact us morally that the world was going through a big pandemic. I'm sure Lebanon was not touch free. It was going through its own share of issues. And then this blast happened. And there's so much of, I would put that word conspiracies of why did the blast happen also. And you are agitated, but while everybody is focused on that blast and the impact, but what you brought out about these individuals who on the grassroots really got impacted, and that story was really heartwarming and heart touching, and I saw some of that and it was really, meaning I should not say it was beautiful, but it was beautiful in the way it was picturized and the way the stories were said. So I want to touch base a little bit further on the entire, because you said you fifth day you were there. So it's not just from Germany to Lebanon. I'm sure Germany was also, the Europe was also going through pandemic. Lebanon was also going to pandemic, and Lebanon also had this bomb blast. How were you able to get the crew along with you to get out of their homes because of the pandemic as well as because of the blast, and you yourself keeping yourself secure and not worrying about you either attracting disease or having officials come behind you because of something what you're doing, which is exposing few things and few
Um,
aspects?
it was definitely risky. It was also a moment in time when many intellectuals in the documentary community around the world that I belong into were asking themselves questions like, are we supposed to be filming while there's a pandemic in the world? What kind of stories give us enough reason to break our lockdown and go out and shoot? I try to, as much as possible, address these things as much as possible, and I try not to take risks. I remember my flight from Berlin to Beirut had literally 9 people on it only. So I knew I was
Wow.
going against the current doing all of this. But at the same time, I tried to follow as much of the world regulations, the WHO regulations. I think I did not drop my mask in a full week of being in Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
And I hand sanitized until my skin was scraped off. But more than anything, this is the type of impulsive filmmaking that characterizes a person like me. It was not so much a creative or artistic endeavor in this case. It was more me wanting to see a city that I grew up in until age 10 only, but a city that continued to inform my filmmaking for many years to come. My most successful film is a film I would make in Beirut after I had left it in so many years. It's called Grandma a Thousand Times. And
Mm-hmm.
I really felt during the explosion that I needed to be there. There were risks that were taken. I think Corona was um, quite, it was spreading so heavily in that period in Lebanon, but the Lebanese tended to undermine it because they were going through the gravity of the explosion itself, which
Yes.
came on the heels of a banking crisis that
Yes.
saw people's savings vanish,
Yep.
that saw the value of the currency drop down to 1/10 of its value. And there were many questions being asked about human suffering and the human condition in that period. But more importantly, in the course of making this film, I started to wonder, what is the culpability of the Lebanese government in all of this? And to what extent should it be stepping forward to protect these citizens or do just anything for them? And that's what happened over the course of making this film. It started out being about Nicole speaking about an explosion and what happened to her husband. But by the end of it, her interviews and all her um, messaging was directed at the Lebanese government. She would imagine if the government was listening in to us, and she would be talking to them invisibly, and that was the only way she could vent and get herself to articulate anything. She was just so bitter, and so were many Lebanese people, because our government somehow did not step in to do anything after the explosion. We've had a number of demonstrations calling for the government to do more. And what ended up happening on these days was that the government officials were shooting down at people with machine guns. It was quite a time to be in Lebanon, not only experiencing the grief, but experiencing a government that is trying to hold on to power at any cost, even if it means shooting at protesters with live ammunition.
Meaning, I can just imagine the amount of risk personally, and it's not just for you, even for your crew, the responsibility which you had to shoulder to ensure that your crew and you are being kept safe as you navigate that 1 week. You spoke about Nicole being an amazing orator and also she ready to share the story. How were you able to get her being comfortable to do that? And you said that she didn't say yes or a no, but it's not the first time you've done that. In your other series as well, whether it's a Champ of the Camp or the Grandma 1,000 Words, you've done that time and again. How do you make people comfortable? Because if you try to shoot me right now, I will be completely uncomfortable with if you try to follow me for the entire day. How do you do that? How do you make them at ease?
I'm I have that embarrassed grin on my face right now,
Okay.
and I wish I could give you a straight answer. I would describe myself before being a filmmaker as being a people's person. I'm a street guy. I have
Hmm.
spent so much time in my life on the street speaking to people. And I've done that around the world. I've done that in bars. I've done that in markets. Um, I have also a lot to thank India and Hinduism for. I've done yoga for more than half of my life. I'm 42 years old. Uh, I can't really put my finger on anything, but I can feel who is a person who is ready to talk and who's a person who is just going to remain like a closed shell. So my
Hmm.
talent is not necessarily talking to people. It's more identifying a person who might open up and share a pain, as opposed to a person who is only interested in being on TV, because those are the people who open up a bit too easily and they make themselves available. You know, the people who get on their tiptoes. So you choose
Yep.
them with your camera. So I know how to avoid those as well. And I
No, because I was going to be talking to you, I said, I should do justice to some of the art which you have created. And I did spend time on Champ of the Camps on a Sunday morning. I was thinking, okay, I'll forward it. Typically, if you watch certain series or documentaries, you want to skip ahead and, see how the protagonist is going to either win it or lose it, or what the intentions or what the further obstacles are going to be. But candidly, I didn't press one time also that 10-second or that 15-second fast forward. It was so intriguing and engaging that I kept on with it. And I watched the entire piece. And somewhere it was heartening, emotional, and many of the other pieces. And that day I thought that, even a media, or I would give that word documentary, like what you did, the Champ of the Camps, it has its place in the mainstream media. We always believe mainstream media as movies or which has songs and drama and a lot of emotions. Even the Champ of the Camp had all of that, but it was not a commercial intent movie. It was something which was telling a story of these individuals staying in those Dubai camps. Uh, but that was not a week long. It was much more than that. How do you
Right.
kept motivation to do that for such a long time, following those journeys?
Right.
I have personally watched The Champ of Camps, and it's a heart touching story about the blue collar workers in Dubai. And the documentary takes more profound insights into the Dubai worker camps. Here is a glimpse of The Champ of the Camps.
अभी इधर सैलरी मेरा बहुत कम सैलरी है। मैं इधर से जितना पैसा वो लोग को भेज रहा है वैसे ही ऐसा ही चलता है। बहुत दुख उठाया है।
कभी कभी ऐसा लगता है हमारा कोई ज़िंदगी नहीं है। जो तो सुबह काम में आता है पूरा पसीना से कपड़ा गीला होता है शाम तक।
Champ of the Camp is the film I made about an Antakshari singing competition that takes place inside the labor camps of the United Arab Emirates. So each participating camp would have a singing competition, mostly Bollywood songs, and the winner in every camp competes with the winners of other camps, and ultimately you have the champ of all camps. Labor camps in themselves are where the main interest for me. A labor camp is a very controversial construct that is synonymous to the rise of the Arabian Gulf. It's these spaces where thousands of men who work mostly in the construction industry go to sleep in the evening. They are men only. Up to 3,000 men can live in a single camp. The facilities are poor, of course, in case you compare it to the rest of the city. And many of these men are separated from their families, usually in India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And they're separated for years while they work in Dubai and make an income which, in fairness, is a lot higher than anything they stand to make in their home countries. But that doesn't take away from the very harsh reality that these men have to live, an emotional separation as well as physical hardship, because they continue to work as the heat ramps up in the summer season and as the rest of the expats of the Gulf countries travel back to their cooler climes in countries in Europe and the Middle East and what have you. I was always keen to explore the labor camps. The labor camps were always tackled in a very hard-hitting journalistic way by the European and North American media. And as well, it kind of ignored a certain personal story. It was always a victimization story. It was always critical of the Gulf and nothing else. But one couldn't help but wonder, why do thousands of men still choose to sign up to come to the Gulf and live such a harsh life? And there's another side to the story. But I wanted to focus on the emotional yearning of these men and how maybe missing their homes and missing their families and suffering gets them to choose Bollywood songs to sing, and why they choose songs that have lyrics that tell their own stories. So in a way, Champ of the Camp, the film, ended up becoming a little bit like a Bollywood film. It has the Bollywood songs, it has multiple genres, it has multiple characters, it has the emotional father, it has the cheater who wants to proceed in the competition and win at any cost. It has the judges, and it has a lot of politics, because by covering this competition, you also get to see for yourself how the camps are run. What do they look like? What are the sleeping areas like? What are the bathrooms like? And how does life unfold in these really strange constructs? They look a lot like jails do, but the people in them are making an income and sending it back home. So it was quite dexterous It's a reality that I wanted to cover so badly. I can't say I had fun making that film. Um, I only had to spend 6 or 7 months filming in camps while these men end up living in them for at least 3 to 4 years. That's usually the length of a work contract. But by the end, I really, honestly, did not want to be in Dubai anymore for a little while because everywhere I would go in my life after completing this film and after the success it had regionally in the Gulf, I would look around and say that there is an equivalent sad reality to every building I see, to every fancy 5-star hotel, to every swimming pool. There's just a bunch of Indians and Pakistanis who are living a very difficult life just to bring this place up so that people like me can enjoy it. And I just really took a break and left Dubai for a few years and been living in Germany since. It's been 6 years now. And I'm slowly appearing in the Gulf scene once again and making projects in this part of the world.
So let's rewind a little bit about your career. You did your undergrad in filming and arts in Beirut. Then you went to Montreal to get your further studies done in filmmaking. And you did do some career in television as a chaser, researcher to Dennis Turner, the famous newsroom anchor of Montreal. But what got you to, this type of filmmaking, I would say? What got you excited, or why choose this stream versus mainstream? Because this choice which you've made, I want to double click on that. Why this choice?
Right. I have indeed studied auteur fiction filmmaking, and I always imagined that I'm going to be more of an artistic fiction filmmaker who writes scripts and films them in difficult conditions and comes out with products that go to Cannes and get debated on their aesthetic level. But I think eventually I just fell in love with the real world, and I find people to be fascinating, and I find the world to be just too interesting to detach from and construct a fake one in a film. I still think I might make a fiction one day, but I doubt I will, just because the more I travel and the more people I meet, the more I discover that breaking into the intimate sphere of people and getting that on camera and getting their worlds on a documentary film is just as thrilling. And there is the other thing about how much I enjoy meeting people and talking to people, as I was just telling you. So in a way, this all culminated into a career in documentary filmmaking. I still when I hear myself described that way, I kind of get a little bit apprehensive. I do like a much more comfortable life than having to be on planes in the middle of pandemics with a mask on the whole time. I do prefer a lifestyle that is more synonymous with the life of directors of TV commercials, maybe, fancier wines, swankier cars, etc., etc. But I really think documentary filmmaking is an exercise of recording human sympathy and moments of human compassion. And some documentary filmmakers can unlock that moment into an outpouring of emotion and information about people's lives. And I think our job is to get these realities across to the general viewer who does not have a clue. And I still get an immense kick out of that, I must say. I had a few years of not making films where I was very absorbed into fatherhood, and that was a learning curve of a different type. But I really still do enjoy speaking to people, and with a camera or without. So I also do go to markets, and I keep my phone in my pocket.
So there's one specific content which you have created, which I believe is very near and dear to you because you have featured yourself in that, which is a grandma 1,000 times. And you've won a lot of recognition also for it. The Tribeca Festival, the Mami Festival. And I believe she's your own grandma whom you have featured in that?
Correct.
Before we hear it from Mahmoud, hear the glimpse from a grandma of thousand times.
أنا الحجة فاطمة مرته لمحمود الرشيد الله يرحمه. لو بعده هلا شو كنت بدلله.
Grandma a Thousand Times was really such a joyride. It was such a small film as I was making it. I had such big worries and concerns that year over other things, and I was chasing much bigger films. And on the side, I was just filming these really creative and humorous sessions with my feisty grandmother. And little did I know that they will come together into a film that will simply override anything else I have ever made. And I continue to try to match it with anything. And the way it was received was really quite insane. And I try to remember that film, to remind myself of that film and of the need to always make things from the heart, because really there was no plan whatsoever to what I was going to do with that material. And as I started weaving it together, it just came together so effortlessly and so seamlessly. And the film had the blessings of my grandma herself. So it kind of caught wildfire and traveled everywhere. I think I spent a bit more than 2 years of my life just traveling to film festivals around the world, fully paid just to share the film with audiences and eat local foods in every place I went to. And it was something I will never forget. Grandma herself was a larger than life character. We sadly lost Grandma only in November of last year, a single month after the Beirut explosion. And it was quite metaphorical, actually, that she would only pass away after witnessing something so devastating. She was really quite feisty, quite playful. When I left to Canada, I stole an audio cassette from her home, which, to my surprise, would feature violin music by my grandfather, which he recorded in his last few years. Grandpa was a famous violinist in the Middle East, but towards the end of his life, he was very ill. So he was homebound for a long while. And to entertain himself, he used to record himself playing solo Arabic violin music on an audio cassette. And he used to save these cassettes for posterity. And one of them would fall in my hands, and I would later listen to it for years, being in Montreal, Canada, as a film student, and later as a television professional. And then I decided to come back to Lebanon one day and just share the fact with her that there's music by him that she does not know. And that's how the film starts. Me and her sitting in her royal sofa in a living room where she raised many generations of young men and women. And I play her his music so she remembers him. And Grandma would go on to tell the story of their love and their past. But in the middle of all of this, there is a twist. And it's the fact that I look very much like my grandfather. And I happen to be named after him. He was also called Mahmoud Kaabour. So as she tells these stories about him, and I'm sitting across from her, she kind of really intensely sees him in me. And sometimes she makes the mistake of thinking that I am him. And I would, of course, jump on that opportunity and slowly start to present myself as him in the film. I would wear his clothes. I would hang out in his room. So it's a very playful, magic realist film about a grandfather, a grandmother, and a grandson, where I'm both the filmmaker and the grandfather, where she is both a feisty woman living in the present in a lonely way by herself, but as well a yearning lover remembering a man whom she loved all her life and who passed away 20 years ago. And it all came together into this very playful film called Grandma a Thousand Times, where we just made poetry together. The whole film, or at least most of it, took place inside my grandmother's home where I grew up. It unfolded over 4 different seasons. We spoke about his death and her impending death. The film is shrouded with music, beautiful Arabic music that the older generation would relate to. But what we did not expect is that the film will really be so well received by people around the world. It seems that the relationship of grandchild to grandmother is just so universal. So the film was, bringing people to tears in Japan and in the United States, and Mommy in India gave it a Best Film Award in the Celebrate Age category. And that was all just hard to believe. Grandma herself was present with me at the premiere, which took place at Doha Tribeca Film Festival in 2010. And we received the first award for the film, which was the Audience Award presented by Robert De Niro. And as you would imagine, her ego would never deflate from that moment onwards. She came back to Lebanon. She did not know who De Niro was. She's more into her Egyptian cinema and Arabic cinema, but she would gloat for years to come about this experience that she had. And later she would as well be thrilled that she would see herself on TV, because the film was also acquired by many networks across the world. So she would switch on Al Jazeera, for example, and see herself, and she'd be calling all her neighbors just to see her on TV. It was quite thrilling to see an old person who was already, living a very, very lonely, sedentary life. Her husband had died. Her kids had moved on and started families of their own. And she was in that stage where one would think she is just waiting for the day to leave this world. And suddenly, out of this loneliness, she became a star. So the phenomenon of making the film as well was also quite intriguing to a lot of people. Grandma was suddenly famous in Lebanon. Some people would notice the handrail of her balcony from watching the film, and they would go up to her home just to meet her, and she would open the door and extend her hand out for kisses, very, very shamelessly. It was sweet. It definitely brought a certain boost to our family and our self-esteem, and to hers as well. She was sadly never interested in a film I made after that, never wanted to watch them. She only was curious to have a part 2 for that film, which I never did. But it was quite sweet.
The story is just beautiful, and I have watched some of it, and it's a universal story. It's not a Lebanon or your relationship with your grandma. It's universal, and I can relate to it as well personally.
Right.
So there's one thing which you mentioned, Mahmoud, about you shooting in your grandma's home, even in the camps. The camp was also doing some shooting of their own, but you were also doing and leveraging some of the setup which was already there, as well as the Lebanon. You were shooting in the real life, but the equipments, the post production, the crew, it costs a lot of money. And in commercial and fictional movies, you have sponsorship, you get money from distribution, you make money out of ticket sales. But in documentary, you don't get any of that. What is the commercial aspect of this? People who don't understand this type of filmmaking, how does commercial piece work?
Well, that's a sore topic, unfortunately. Documentary filmmaking, to a large extent, there are documentaries that make money. My grandma movie was really quite generous to me. I owned the rights. I made it out of pocket, so I made all the money from that and shared that money with no one. So that was a very successful commercial endeavor. Champ of the Camp, on the other, I did not see that money back. It was done very professionally. We had 4 film crews, 4 film units working on it to cover the competition as it unfolds in multiple camps at the same time. We recorded in Dolby Sound. That was back in 2013. It was technically punching much higher than its weight. But then the distribution that the film recorded, which was restricted to the Arabian Gulf, was not enough to pay for its cost. So I came out of that film, limping, quite frankly. They don't always succeed. There's the commissioned films, which are the safest bet. So say you work with Netflix, they like something you have, so they will pay upfront for what you're making. Mm-hmm. And that's financially safe. Maybe you come out with a bit of profit, but that also means that the platform like Netflix owns your film and not yourself. So you will not even have the privilege of showing your film in a private room to people who might benefit from it. So it turns into very much a product. There are different ways for making different types of films, but to me, every film I made has worked according to a different model. I have made my films with different crews every time. I believe that there's a film family that needs to come together to bring birth to a single new film. I work with new cinematographers every time, with new editors. I feel that every film will attract people who believe in it and who want to contribute to it for more than just a fee. I could not have done My Family and the Explosion had my crew not been willing to volunteer to work. I would say all of them have worked without a fee. And later, when I sold the film, I was able to pay them. And those are usually the people who bring a certain passion into the trade. They're not in it just for the paycheck. They believe in the story that you're trying to say. And to me personally, the documentary community in Beirut, Lebanon, is simply unmatched with a certain passion that they have to simply see a story come to life. I've worked with crews in Dubai. I've worked with crews in Germany and Canada. I filmed internationally, and it's a job to a lot of people. But the Lebanese have this passion to seeing a piece of cinema come to life. And for that, I love them so much. It's not because I hail from there, but because twice already, the passion of the Lebanese has allowed 2 pieces of cinema of mine to come to life before I knew where the money was going to come from.
Wow. Yeah, people don't appreciate many of these types of movies, because today technology has also allowed you to distribute it in multiple platforms, whether it is YouTube or Vimeo or many of them. And today YouTube is free, Vimeo is free, so people will feel, oh, it's like. And today there are many creators also. So what's your perspective on these multiple platforms, whether it is YouTube or Netflix or Amazon, and there are so many more coming up every day? What's your perspective? Is it helping? Is it deterring as a maker of content?
Well, the platform war is much larger than us, the content creators. I already believe the world has more platforms than it needs. I think there are more platforms than people will ever spend on. Maybe people in Dubai, let's say, have such high disposable income that they can sign up for Netflix and Amazon and HBO, etc., etc. But in the rest of the world, people are very selective. They might do 1 or 2. And in a city like Berlin, where I'm based, many people actually choose not to sign up for any platform because to them, watching movies is something that you do in the movie theater. There's still this integrity to the art form where people are willing to only consume a concert, let's say, at the concert hall, or a movie at the movie theater. There's that kind of authenticity to the media. For us, of course, there's a threat. The technology has advanced so much that anyone can go out and shoot their own film and edit it on on their iPhone. The platforms are really quite restricted and a bit of a star culture. So Netflix will only work with select film directors on documentaries, and they want the documentaries to be done according to a very specific formula. I personally do not enjoy watching more crime content on Netflix. I can see how this formula works, but I can see how all these new productions are abiding with that formula. The food porn formula is another one. You watch one or two or three, but if you're getting stuck into watching that, you're not really watching anything new. And I'm more of a person who likes for a new story to attract me, and I don't know yet what the formula is going to be and whether it's going to be a commercial success. And luckily for me, I don't mind failing on one and succeeding with another one. VOD is very, very formulaic for me. I hate to say. It's a bit like eating candy. It's very easy to swallow. And to me, a documentary should not necessarily be made for the entertainment aspect. It's great to watch a documentary that entertains you as well. But to me, I come from a tradition where documentary filmmaking is about really digging into human nature and showing you things you did not see on film before. And it's very much about watching monitoring the sources of power. Documentary has to quiz power on authority, on abuse of power, on how power is being applied. It's very much in the journalistic vein, and I like that as well. And you don't expect to find that on Netflix. Netflix is very much about entertainment. So documentary is transforming a little bit in light of these platforms. We're seeing these very entertaining documentary titles, which even someone like myself enjoys watching. But I expect more from the documentary genre. It has to tell me more about my world. It has to be a little bit more challenging. It has to unseat power and make it feel that it's being watched. And that's the domain that I signed up to contribute cinema into.
You did mention about technology in a different light, like iPhone or poor production aspect. In your filmmaking, you have seen technology evolve also, whether these are cameras or whether this is post production, and now with VFX and drones and so much of that aspect. So, double clicking on technology further, how much do you feel today when you are shooting, you still like that raw shooting with just a camera rather than bringing these blings and flings? Is that a necessity today when you do that, or do you feel that it's not required?
I mean, when technology evolves in documentary filmmaking, the aesthetic changes as well. The access changes. Like I studied filmmaking in a film school which was transitioning from 16 millimeter filmmaking into HD. So I did my final year film on a video camera, but everything I had studied before was on film, and film was slow. You had to light for it, you had to cut it manually and stick it together. It was very much like learning tailoring or knitting. It's very much about organization. Some people would shoot this beautiful stuff, and then the strips would fall somewhere on the floor and they wouldn't find them again. New technology takes us to new places. I think the invention of the phone allowed us to make more intimate filmmaking. So there is still high production value filmmaking that gets done. When you make a documentary for the BBC or Channel 4, you still shoot with a professional crew with like 4K cameras, and you have a bigger team shooting. But there's also a lot that is being done on iPhones right now that allows you intimate access. People get a little bit too hung up on what technology to use, but the truth is good storytelling is still a requirement for any type of filmmaking you do. So even if you're shooting with the biggest crews and you don't have a story, is not the same as getting a film master make his next film on an iPhone, and he's still employing his own narrative techniques and interesting storytelling to grip you. So I still feel that at the core of documentary filmmaking, there is a storytelling talent that is required. And the people who have it are not necessarily people who are wonderful technicians or kids who are very good with their phones and things like that. It's more about people who, can weave a story together. People who've done a lot of jigsaw puzzle as kids, or people who read books. It's very much about what comes before what. There's never one right answer, but when you capture so much reality on film, you later have to go into a room and decide where the story stops and where it starts, and how you extract a really emotional story out of basically filming just life. And that's where the focus to me should remain.
So just building on this guidance which you just provided to many of my listeners. So if anybody is thinking about developing their careers in what you are doing, similar to it or evolve it, what would be your perspective be? You did mention about storytelling being the paramount piece, and you did touch about pace, the SAR point about money, which is involved. What else would you share as a perspective?
Well, career and employment and income are questions that trouble a lot of people in this world right now, especially as it transforms once again in light of Corona and technological upheaval and the lack of travel. I think we're safe to say that no one can guarantee that anything that they study at a university anymore will bring them an income. So it's good to keep that in mind. I still encourage people to learn trades. If you have a trade, you have an income. If you can work, if you can ply wood, and if you can work with metal, or if you can fix bathrooms, that's payable, billable hours that you can get paid for. That's not the same with filmmaking, unfortunately. Filmmaking is very much a star culture. There'll be one or two or three or four very successful people who make the big paychecks, but the medium good ones do not get half the fee. They just get nothing. I never got into this business to make money, but I have learned along the way how to monetize my work, how to distribute it. The paychecks have gotten smaller over the years as content has spread around the world, and people have started making their own content. I think approaching documentary filmmaking with a paycheck in mind is not the right approach. If this is what you're after, please go to something else. Make advertising that has still a little bit of money left in it, but even that is transforming. But I really also feel that storytelling in itself is a talent that can be taken out of documentary filmmaking and applied somewhere else. And right now, even businesses and corporations, everyone is trying to come up with their own narrative. And once you learn how to make narratives, you can take that into different fields. I really hope, nonetheless, that the world will continue to see documentary filmmakers who can take us to where we cannot go. And I do not mean here getting on a plane and flying to the North Pole. I mean taking us into local families, into local traditions, taking us into places where strangers don't get to go, and taking us there for a reason. We don't just want to watch to feed curiosity. We want to learn. We want to learn stories that empower us to take action, to participate. The world is tired right now of colonial filmmaking. This is a term that you hear quite a bit on the festival circuit. No one wants the European to fly in Africa and show us films from there anymore. No one wants the Arab to go into the labor camp to tell us stories from there. We want the locals of every reality to reflect on their own realities. And with that in mind, people can now pick up their very smartphones and make something from their own milieu and take us to a place we have not seen.
How has family supported you in this entire endeavor? Because you also have your family to support you to be on this journey?
Family is a big question. I've lived in multiple families in my life. I think making my choice to be a filmmaker was fully supported since my childhood, because luckily for me, I come from a family that works in the arts. I have a grandfather who was a violinist, uh, a TV director uncle, a composer uncle. My father was a banker, but he was also a writer. So all this made my choice of entering the arts to be less challenging than it is for other kids, and that was okay. I would say it was a little bit harder much later in life as technology was transforming, as films were generating less revenue, to be a family man. That was a hard moment when I was perhaps bringing in a smaller paycheck than a man my age could. But, I still love what I do, and I can finally create enough volume of work and have different irons in the fire, some projects in development, some projects about to finish, that I know that some money will be coming in at some point or another. It's really not easy. It's not easy to have kids and to be a documentary filmmaker, to need to be away from home every time you need to shoot. I left two daughters behind in Germany to plunge into a city where an explosion had just taken place and where corona is spreading. That's more the life of international reporters. And I had promised early in life everyone around me that I'm not going to be that. I'm not the type of filmmaker that goes to dangerous places to capture stories. It was exceptional in Beirut, but I would say this has put a duress on my family. And that was, my daughter, who's 8, kept saying, but what you're doing is wrong. We here in Germany are not even going to the supermarket anymore, and you're trying to go to Beirut, Lebanon, in the middle of a pandemic. It's the nature of the trade, unfortunately, but it's also part of the thrill. And I will not hide that there's an immense thrill in this. No one needs to push me to do it. Just get me on a plane and send me somewhere, and I'll be the best version of myself as I tell stories.
One last perspective from you, Mahmoud. Is there somebody whom you look up to in your stream of work?
That's a good question. Of course, there are many filmmakers whom I love, many documentary filmmakers, but as well many storytellers. Names that come to mind are, of course, Errol Morris in the US. He's one of the masters of documentary filmmaking who continued to make visually inventive films. He developed a language of his own, and he has managed to turn the art of interview into something completely new and elevated. My favorite interviewer in the world is probably the late Anthony Bourdain, who did not make what you would say is feature-length documentaries. He was more of a television personality, but his level of empathy in speaking to people he met over the world and sharing a meal with them was really so fresh in both sympathy and style. He was what I called a one-man genre. But I also tend to love the people who transform their trade. So storytellers who can do a little bit of fiction and a little bit of documentary and can equally pick up a phone and put something on YouTube and not constantly feel inhibited in the parameters of their art form. Because to me right now, filmmakers who are still trying to go out and make a film that is 3 hours long and expect that anyone is going to sit and watch that, anyone more than a group of 50 or 100, I really think that's delusional as well.
Sure.
Technology keeps changing, and with that comes a rewiring of our brains. I'm not condoning completely surrendering to every new platform that comes out and forces upon us a new style of filmmaking. But I would say that we cannot acknowledge that we cannot ignore that people now watch stories that are 1 and 2 minutes long or 30 seconds long. And I think the people who want to make meditative cinema the way it used to be done 40 or 50 years ago, they just need to acknowledge the social media.
On that note, Mahmoud, it's been an amazing conversation which you and I have had. I've learned a lot personally from your experience and from your background. Thank you for taking time out. I know you are in the midst of something very exciting, soon to be released out to all of us. So best of luck with that. I will let my audience look up your profile and be eager to see what's coming in.
Right.
So I'll not spill the beans there, but
Sure.
create that excitement.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to look back and reflect at how I've lived my life, and
Yep.
hopefully there will be more interesting guests on your show to listen to.
Definitely, Mahmoud. And thank you and best of luck and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you for listening in. And we close yet another episode of Masters Decoded. If you've enjoyed the episode, please, you can help us out by sharing it on social media. I would personally appreciate that. It's how we can reach more listeners, and the more listeners we have, the more awesome guests I can get in touch and convince to participate in these conversations that are a joy to have for me, and I hope they are a joy for you to listen as well. You can also help a lot leaving reviews on iTunes or your podcast service of choice. Reviews are surprisingly helpful in supporting the podcast to get to more listeners. If this episode has intrigued you, I would request you to subscribe to the podcast to stay up to date and get notified to the future episodes. With that, I bid you and see you in the next episode.